So, were there any questions or comments about the advocacy ideas, or why music, shall we say? I know we haven't talked about some of these very much in depth, but we kind of will keep coming back to some of these throughout the next discussion of what is music, how does it work, how does it have meaning as well. But before we went on, as you're just kind of reading down this list, was there anything you were wondering about or just wanted to make a comment about? Yes?
Like, would there ever be like a position in which like we as music teachers have to basically go to the admins and like give them almost like a legal and just present this type of thing to them?
Okay, good question. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So the way it works is not that you hear a rumor you're going to get X, so then you start all of this. The way it works is you are just constantly exuding this stuff because it's who you are, all right? And if it's not who you are right now, it needs to become part of who you are, because first of all, if they hired you, they already believe a lot of it, but they probably can't articulate it. So you just find appropriate times to work things into conversations. You talk with your students about some of these things, just as one of the cool things music does at or whatever age and stage they are. You talk with parents about these things in conversations. It's just part of who you are as a person, that you know and can clearly talk about what it is you do and why it's beneficial and what the kids are getting. And in letters home, in discussions in the break room with other teachers, it's just kind of part of who you are, that you understand and talk about these things. And then if you're in a formal situation where you're being asked to be the expert in decision making, probably somewhere later on in your career, then you have a lot of practice at it, you have a lot of resources, you can easily look up sources for these ideas and present them in a formal way, and maybe even at a conference. When you become a respected teacher in your field, you know, that's an eventual process. But like when I was at the school that I just came from, we had a founding administrator and pastor who was an church organist in the Lutheran church and choir director before he was saved. And then when he started our school, wanted to get music into it as soon as he could. He directed a choir at first. But then when he met my dad, actually, in the early 80s, he started kind of working on him to come down. We lived in northern Michigan at the time. And our first connection with the school I ended up with was my dad had just gotten out of public school work, and he was becoming aware of this new Christian school movement, which had really started in the early 70s, but he was kind of coming into it in the early 80s. And there were getting to be more and more of them around Michigan at that point. So he went to one of the national conventions, they call it. It's kind of a big, like AACS Nationals here at Bob Jones type of event for the group of schools we were with. And he saw that there were barely any instrumental music things going on, and they were very low level. And he said, I remember saying, man, somebody should really do something about this, and God just popped into his head, why not you? So his first step toward that was becoming a circuit riding band director. So he went around to 12 different schools in Michigan, all small schools just starting up, and he found a musician of some kind at that school who could keep things going in between his visits. And he actually wrote a curriculum, for an instrumental curriculum for like music theory and basic knowledge, and to get them started on their instruments. And back then the band books didn't have a lot of that type of thing in them, the band curriculums. They were mostly just collections of songs. So he actually wrote a lot of that stuff, had the kids use it. And then one of the schools that invited him to be part of that process was the school in southern Michigan that we just ended up at. So eventually we moved down there. He stopped the circuit riding thing, but he had a summer band camp where all these schools would come to. He'd bring in people that were high-level teachers from wherever he could get them, and that's a lot of our connection with Bob Jones. He eventually brought up pretty much the whole BJ music faculty to teach at our camp in the summer by the time I was in high school. Instrumental music faculty, I mean. But it was just kind of interesting. So that was the environment that I was hired into. I didn't have to tell anybody rationale for anything to be hired there. They wanted me to come. At that point, my dad had moved on to Maranatha and was teaching future music teachers as part of this vision of helping instrumental music in the schools. So what happened though was with my own students for retention, I found that I needed to be talking about these things with them so they knew why it was valuable. It wasn't just some fun thing they were in to be with their friends or some of those other reasons we've talked about. Why do students join groups? A lot of times has nothing to do with what's actually really valuable for them about being there. So I'd be talking with them, I'd be talking with parents so they would know what was valuable about it at concerts, at games, whenever I was talking to parents, and it was a natural way to work something in. You know, I was trying to build a culture and build an understanding in their minds at teachers conferences or parent-teacher conferences. At our like opening meeting for the year, I would speak, letters home. You know, I was constantly advocating for what their children were getting in our music program, and just trying to kind of build an understanding and a culture with the other teachers, especially as teachers came in that hadn't come from a musical environment of a school before or in their background, so that they wouldn't be fighting against me. They would be understanding and helping as I was trying to help them in their objectives. They helped me in our objectives in the music program, and we're working together as a team. And then about, what would have been 5 years into my time there, the original pastor and administrator who started the school passed away. He had cancer. And so one of my fellow teachers became principal and our assistant pastor became pastor. And at that point, I sat down and just had long conversations about a bunch of things with each of them, including some of these types of things, so that we were on the same page and working together. And it wasn't like that they were wanting to change anything, but I just wanted to be ahead of the ball, because I knew if they didn't have the same understanding and commitment to it that our previous pastor and administrator have, we would eventually have problems. So again, I was kind of priming their understanding for when the situation did arise, that things got tight financially, and they did when the recession hit. It wasn't, okay, first thing we're going to do is chuck the music program. And they understood those things, and they valued them. And they kept me there as long as they could, far past when they actually should have. As the school kept shrinking after the recession, a lot of people moved out of our area, and then the pastors moved out because their congregations got small, and then eventually our school just got down to the point where we were too small to have a full-time specialist on. It was a legitimate hardship that you couldn't just say, okay, but we're just going to do it, you know. And at that point, I was about the time I was looking for what God had for me next, and this position opened up here. So, long story, I just wanted to give you a picture of how some of those things work in real life. Now, you may have a time, like I said, where you get a presentation with your PowerPoints and your statistics, and you give this at a ACS teachers conference or whatever public school organization your school is part of, or you are asking in teachers pre-service, or you ask the administrator in teachers pre-service, maybe in conjunction with your other arts teachers, to give a presentation of some of these type of ideas from the background of this is a way that if we as a school understand these things, we can better work together, and then reciprocating, what are the objectives of the other departments? How can I work with you guys to help meet your objectives as well? So that team teaching as a faculty is a good way to approach some of these things in the school. Yes?
So I've always thought of advocacy like putting out fires kind of ideas, like, so, but you're thinking it's more of like preventing things from coming up is how we need to think about this.
Think about it as keeping your lawn watered in the dry season, so that the fire doesn't start.
Yeah.
So then, like, what we're doing, like, for the general music teacher who's not planning to go on the political side of this, advocate, this is kind of like the personal plus supported with statistical advocacy that we do in our own schools. But then, fun fact, if you want to go to an advocacy program, Dr. Moore offers that with the SCMEA that you could send as a representative in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, you can go all the way up to lobbyist in Washington if you want, but this is a whole area of music education, and NAPME has a whole section of people just on this, and trying to work with legislatures, since public education happens through the state, not the national legislature, through the state legislatures. the states still control education. So, but yeah, in each of the 50 states, they'd have people working with those and promoting our goals and our ideas. And you know, eventually, if this was your thing, you could possibly end up as one of those type of people, or working for a large organization in charge of this type of thing. But yeah, as regular music teachers, it's just about, it's part of educating everybody that we're around. It's part of us being us. We want to rub off on them in a positive way. And the more of this we have and the more practice in ourselves, and the more practice we have in saying it in ways that young children can understand, middle-aged and older children can understand, fellow teachers can understand, parents can understand, administrators can understand, and maybe eventually even beyond that, if the Lord expands your boundaries at conferences or organizations or whatever, then that's great too. But for you guys, the first step is just getting it clear inside yourselves and learning how to talk about it. So, any other questions about that? Okay, let me hand out. Actually, before I hand this out, I want you guys to do an activity here. I'm going to read a selection to kind of prime your minds here. Then I'm going to have you do a quick activity. So if you want, you'll be writing something. So if you want to get out notebook paper or your computer or whatever you want to use to write while I'm reading this. So the name of this article, and I will put this up on Canvas later, is just titled, "What is Music?" On the surface, the question, what is music, may seem like an extremely obvious and unnecessary one. Everyone knows what music is, right? We listen to, perform, create, and think in music from the time we were young. As we move throughout our day, we hear music in the mall, in the grocery store, in the elevator, on the radio, on TV, on our computers, our phones. Music surrounds us. However, ask someone to give you a concise, accurate definition of music, and the confusion begins. Try it yourself. How did you do? So, what I'd like you to do specifically is write a one-sentence definition of music that applies to music of all kinds. In that definition, I want you to consider how music is different from noise. I want you to consider how music is different from sound effects, and how music is different from spoken language. Okay, so I'll write this up on the board, but go ahead and start thinking about it.
One sentence?
One sentence.
How
As short, let's just say as short as you can. Okay.
I just keep recall those all
Okay.
Paul had a really long sentence, and it was called the chapter.
Again, verbalizing what we understand, or what we believe, not only helps us understand it more clearly, but if we go on and on and on, we lose people. So we want to be able to do things concisely. Build off the single sentence to expand on it, but don't give them the whole 10-page presentation at once. Let me just say, music is not, or different from, noise, sound effects, and what was the fifth thing I said? Language, spoken language. And you don't have to address each of these in your definition. I just want to make sure your definition doesn't also apply to any of those.
So yeah, we can use like sound in our definition.
I'm just saying, make sure that somebody couldn't read your definition and have it also apply to language or sound effects or noise. I will give you 2 minutes instead of 30 seconds for this one. And for Anna's sake here, I'm going to focus in on the board so she can see it too. So now you guys are all in the shot. Say hi to Anna.
Well, because there's also, it's just like 20th century, is that noise music?
European elements were specified to it. Depends on who you ask.
I know, so like that,
Yeah.
The sound effects have to do.
Because it's not necessarily melodic.
But that would, yeah.
But I like the
I don't
melodic,
like
not melodic.
And mine's a little too.
All right, now that you've had a chance to talk a little bit, go ahead and come up with a group definition that you're going to share with the other group.
Okay, so like, it's just
It's like grouping sounds with tone, pitch, rhythm, what the purpose of the series, like intelligent.
Yeah, so intelligence is how that combines pitch with tone.
Everybody knows
Melody, timbre.
because it's music with symbols or music with sounds groups.
it's a combination. Because there's.
Ooh, good discussion.
It's a combination of
I
the
don't know,
two,
it
because
doesn't
that's
have
why
to
I
be.
said, it's a system of and the result of.
You know how few college students even know those concepts to talk about?
Like music is a
Yeah.
system of and the result of.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's like the same thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's not as
Music
good.
is
Yeah.
the system of symbols of organization. Like if I just add a system of symbols in here, will that make it better?
So wait, are we using yours? I mean,
I don't know, are we using yours or are we using mine? I don't know.
Okay, about 30 seconds here.
Looks good.
Okay.
I know I'm really rushing you on something that actually is a fairly complex thing, but just want to use this as a jumping off point for
Just
us.
be like the whole paper.
Yeah.
I don't get the ideas, but.
Yeah,
Like, I feel
For the
like-
next class.
I already did it for you, don't worry about it.
Don't get any ideas.
Actually, you can choose that topic if you want. We do have a paper in this class, right? Do we have a paper in this class? I can't remember.
what is the feeder program?
Okay, maybe that's the other one. Yeah, I'll get that. Okay, I'm gonna turn the camera back on here and see what we have. Oh, okay, it says 200 minutes. Hopefully that's accurate. We won't need 200 minutes. Okay, so one thing I did want to come back to in you guys' definition was you said something about it being in a system of symbols. What was that phrase?
Music is the system of symbols in the organization of sound.
Okay. Is music a system of symbols? I'm not talking about notated music. Notated music is all symbols, but it is not music. It represents music, right? So is music a system of symbols?
That's what we were arguing about.
Okay, and that's a very good discussion, because if music is used as a symbol sometimes. It's called taps. It's called da 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 charge. It's called we learned these sounds mean this, and they always mean this, but they don't mean this because of how they sound. They mean this because we learned it and connected those two. That's music as a symbol. All right, so there are all sorts of things within a culture where music acts as a symbol. The military is the most obvious place to start, because we know they have certain bugle calls and drum cadences if you go a ways back, and they use musical sounds in a symbolic fashion instead of words, because instruments were a lot louder than somebody yelling to their troops in the middle of a battle. They could actually hear it, or a mile away as they're marching or whatever. But one of the things that Dr. Townsend's article was about, and that I'm also going to be talking about today too, is a lot of people confuse that. Music is because they think of like musical symbols and it's all just kind of tied together in their mind. There's another idea called signs that is actually a lot more how music has meaning to us. And in a sign, it looks like or it sounds like what it is. We don't have to be taught that it is that thing to make that connection. So he used the example of a road sign that shows you there's a curve coming up ahead, does this, because that is a visual representation of a curve, and there's something about that is like what the curve is. In a similar way, when you're talking about music as an aesthetic expression, music sounds like our life experience feels. And people might say music sounds like feelings feel. But remember, if they're using that word feeling, it's like Dr. Townsend was talking about, it doesn't mean an emotion. It means a physical sensation or an imagined sensation inside. It's that kind of feeling. So let's go ahead and jump into our discussion here. And at this time, I will pass these out. We'll get part of the way through this hour and then wrap it up next hour. So, that exercise that I had you guys do was a multi-year exercise in my mind through college, grad school, and the first few years of my teaching. Because it just always bugged me that every definition that I usually would hear of music, I could say, yeah, but that also applies to, or yeah, but that doesn't cover, or, you know, so that was just something that was an interesting thing that constantly kind of going on in my mind. So what my objective was to say in as few words as possible something that could apply to all music, but yet differentiate between music and other things that are common in our world. So the way I eventually condensed it down to is music is nonverbal sound, artistically organized to express meaning. Right, so the nonverbal sound is one whole category that we'll talk about. Artistically organized is another category, and expressing meaning is kind of the third category that we'll talk about here. So go ahead and get pencil or pen out to follow along in your outlines here today, and I'll try and emphasize the words as we come to them that we need there. So we start out with music is nonverbal sound. What do we mean by nonverbal sound? Well, music is different from spoken language. In verbal sound, in spoken language, we have verbal sounds that are used to form words, which have specific definitions. So think about, as we're talking, a lot of time, most of the time, there's nothing about the sounds that I'm saying that have anything to do with the meaning of those sounds. Now, there's one classification of words, onomatopoeia, buzz, drip, you know, things like that, where you're kind of mimicking the sound itself and the words. But other than those, we only know what somebody means because at some point, for each of those sounds or sound combinations, somebody taught us, or we figured out, when they do that, they mean this. When I hear this, it means this. When I hear this, it stands for this. When I hear this, it contains these possible interpretations, and I decide on which one. So let me do this for you, because I'm going to go a little bit, I think, too quickly for you to catch everything here. Let me just pull up my outline on the screen here so you can follow along with me as I go. That way we won't necessarily have to miss anything as we go here, and I don't have to stop and keep up, because some of these have a few things to fill in on each one. All right, there we go. I'll blow this up too once I get to my file. Can you tell which way my mind works?
Not
See, I would lose stuff if it was that much involved.
I would be so lost.
Yeah.
So like,
My dad would be too. He's
I
the
mean,
other
I
way.
put some things in folders, but
oh, I
like,
put folders inside of folders inside of folders.
I can only do that like 2 times and then I'm like lost.
He's saying, well, like, maybe have like music classes, and I have a class in that.
No,
That's
like,
my brother.
I don't even have a folder for like music classes. I'll just have like econ, and then I'll have like chapter reading questions, and then there's questions. Because anymore, and I'm like, I don't know.
My brother's like, okay,
No,
like you're gonna
oh, it's
organize
me.
everything.
Okay.
All right, and you're also going to see my little blue comments in here are things that I'm supposed to do and say with you, but you'll kind of see it as it goes.
You don't have to talk about it.
You don't have to copy those down, unless you want to. All right, so we talked about verbal sounds are used to form words which have specific definitions. We put those definitions in things called dictionaries, or we hold them in our minds and teach them to the next generation. That's how they know what our language means. if you don't know what a language means, you can't guess from hearing the sounds. There's nothing in the sounds that give you a clue to what it means necessarily. Each language has certain sounds and combination of sounds that are connected to exact meanings. To communicate using a language, a person must learn the sounds of that language and the exact meanings those sounds represent. These sound combinations form a vocabulary which is passed from one generation to another. I think you remember, or I think in one of our articles, Dr. Gordon pointed that out. Music is not a language because it has no vocabulary, and in a sense of spoken language anyway. Now when people say music is a language of emotion, they're talking about it communicates something and it works like a language, and in those ways they're forming a comparison. But technically, as we define language as humans, that's a different thing. So if we say the word grass or sky or life or shimmer or buzz, other than buzz, the others really have nothing to do, the sound of them has nothing to do with the definition of them. We just had to learn that at some point. And if we want to learn a different language, we start that process all over. And some languages even go about the whole process in a completely different way than ours do. For instance, languages of the Far East, where the tonal direction and inflection has something to do with the meaning. Although people that know the languages tell me in practicality they don't do much of it. They just kind of slur through it all and you know from context what it means, which makes it really hard to understand if you've sat there and learned this means this means this, and then nobody actually says it that way. But we have the same type of things going on in English too, especially with spellings. Oh my goodness. Number two there, music is not usually limited to specific meanings for each sound or combination of sounds. So unlike language, which has a certain one or maybe group of meanings that goes with each sound combination, music's not limited in that way. Music is not a language, not even a language of emotion, as we've mentioned. There's no list of musical sounds with the meanings of those sounds defined. In other words, there is no vocabulary in music. Now, the closest thing there is common patterns, common rhythm patterns, or common tonal patterns within our particular kinds of music, within our musical culture, within Western music, within music of the Far East. There are certain often used patterns, but nobody's gone and assigned those patterns specific meanings. For instance, if we hear ba 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 ba, that doesn't mean grass, or do do do, that doesn't mean tree. They're just common things that we kind of have inside of us that are the kind of blocks or pieces to a puzzle that we can put together in a whole bunch of different ways and make something out of. I think of maybe blocks would be a better example. If you ever had like build little things with blocks, or Legos maybe. You know, the musical patterns are kind of like different color and sizes of Legos, if you want to think of it that way. There's not one meaning tied to each one. There's not one thing only you can build with each one. One exception is when music is used as a signal, such as bugle calls or drum cadences for specific military commands. However, that kind of information is a learned association, not an inherent meaning, and we already kind of described that. That is, a signal is using music as a sign. That's what that is. So, yes, there is some example of it, but that's not music in a musical way. That's music in a spoken language, used in a spoken language way. Yes?
Could be a fantasy.
Oh, I'm sorry. That would help, wouldn't it? There you go. Going on to letter B. Music combines elements such as pitch, duration, timbre, intensity, and texture into a unique type of expressive system. So do we have each of those things in spoken language, as we were talking about before? Do we have pitch, duration, timbre, intensity, texture? Yeah, we have all those in spoken language, but it uses them, and this is what we were talking about with Nathan and Ellie's definition, music uses them in a unique way that's different from how we use them in language. These elements are also used in spoken language to help communicate meaning more effectively. Vocalics are studied, and that's the name of the whole category of those things I just mentioned in speech. It's called vocalics. They're studied and practiced by skillful speakers because they greatly affect the meaning of the spoken words. So in written language, we don't have any of that because it's not sound. We have to infer that based on our knowledge of language. But in spoken language, we have all of those quote-unquote musical aspects that have a huge impact on the meaning of what we're saying. Go ahead and catch up if you need. We're going to talk for a second on some other things here without writing anything down. So if you think of vocalics are a kind of nonverbal communication. They're how you say the words instead of what you're saying. They're everything in speech except for the words. One example that's easy to have a lot of variety with is the simple 3-word sentence, I love you. How many ways could that be said? How many meanings would be different depending on the way we said it? We can say it enthusiastically, we can hurry through it, monotone, even angrily, tenderly. We could say it as a question, I love you. And it actually means the opposite, even though it's the same 3 words. Just because of the way we said it. The way we use the musical elements in speech greatly affects the meaning of what we're saying. So vocalics change the meaning of spoken words even to the opposite meaning. Why do I stop and talk about vocalics in a discussion about music? Because almost all of the music, almost everybody in our society spends almost all of their time with is vocal music. Very few people just listen to instrumental music by itself. Once you get out teaching and talk to your students about those things, you'll find it's very rare for people to listen to instrumental music unless they grow up in a home of parents who are instrumental musicians. And sometimes their parents will be into bluegrass or into this or into that, you know, or they may have been just brought up in a household where they listen to classical music, have NPR on in the background. Those are the types of peoples that listen to instrumental music. Almost nobody else does anymore, except for backgrounds to movies. That's about the only place that people actually buy and listen to instrumental music for the most part. You know, which is kind of hard for us to imagine. I bet on your playlist, as in mine and my CD collections and whatever, there's tons of whole collections of just instrumental music. In fact, there's more than there's vocal music in a lot of those, especially the CDs I purchased over the years. But that's not necessarily the case for most people in our society anymore. What do you think would be an analogy there between what we say and how we say it in vocalics when we're talking about vocal music now, where we're combining words with musical sounds? And I'm not going to ask for an answer at this point. But there's a big connection to how meaning works that you can use one as an example of the other, and we'll kind of get back to that later. All right, so let's move on for now. Music could be described as extended and developed vocalics organized into patterns. So that's one way we could think about music. And people with an evolutionary viewpoint of life think that's how music developed. They think that they just took the vocalics in speech and lengthened them and organized them into patterns and started using them by themselves without the words, and that's how music developed. Which, knowing that God created Adam in his image, I'm guessing he probably started with a lot of it already going on, but that's a guess. We don't know for sure. All we know is that within a couple generations, there was Jubal that was an instrument manufacturer. So take what you will from that. Music is, so that's talking about so far, music is nonverbal sound. That's what we mean by nonverbal sound. Music is artistically organized. And all of you had some way of kind of getting at this idea in your definitions, and when you're talking about elements of music or patterns, or some of you use the words organized, or, that's a big part of how you differentiate music from noise, music from random sound, shall we say. So music is artistically organized sound. It's not random noise. It's highly planned and structured sound. It contains and follows predictable patterns and forms. These patterns and forms are understood and expected by people within a musical culture. Now, when we're talking about the patterns and forms of music, they aren't universal from culture to culture. There are some aspects of music that are universal, but often if we listen to music from a different culture that's especially had a different path of development, like Western music versus Eastern music. It takes some acculturating to get used to what's going on there. Now, there's some things we can pick up the first time we hear it, but we will be getting a very different meaning from people who grew up in those cultures listening to that, because they have the predictable patterns in their mind. To us, I think of Middle Eastern music and in the music of India, those are even microtonal musics sometimes. To us, it sounds like they're just kind of wavering sharp and flat and not really being definite in their pitch. No, they're singing quarter tones, and our ears aren't used to thinking of music in that way. But theirs are, and that means something to them when they do the inflections in that way, versus if we just sang it and thought, okay, that he's just singing out of tune there, and then we put it on definite half steps all the way through. We would come up with an approximation of their music, but we'd be missing a lot of what they're getting out of it, because we aren't used to those types of patterns. So deviating too far from these understood and expected patterns causes the music to be confusing and unpleasant to the listener. We think a really obvious example of that is when you get into some music history courses and you start listening to things way too far on one end or the other of the musical development. Things that, how interesting was the 5 hours of Gregorian chant you had to hear, or how pleasant was the 5 hours of 20th century compositions that you had to hear, especially when it got to the people who were experimenting with the definitions of music, everybody brings up John Cage with his 3 minutes and 30 seconds or whatever the title is, however many seconds of silence, and his point wasn't that this is great music. His point is, what is music, and how far can we push the bounds before people don't think of it as music anymore. Yet the irony is some people perform that and get away with performing that on recitals at major universities, which, if I were the if I were the teacher, did they hear?
Yeah. I think it was Elliot Lefkow.
Okay. Okay. That surprises me a little, but it's not unique. It happens. So, and it's a statement. It's just a statement. It's not a performance as much as it is a statement. Making people think about what is music. So anyway, letter B there. Music is more than sound effects, and this is one of the ways I want you to differentiate. How is it different from sound effects? Sound effects, things like sirens, the sound of a telephone ringing, the sound of a baby crying. This is also a big part of, when they're putting together a film score. That the music is part of it, but then there's a whole section of people that are working on the sound effects. If a guy slugs another guy in a fist fight, it doesn't sound like what it actually would sound like if somebody slugged him in a fist fight. They have this slap sound they put in there to make it sound powerful. And they go all the way through and they add these sound effects in to get the impression across that they want to do. The Foley Sounds, I think, is one organization that does all of those things. And if you've ever watched the making of portions of movies, then they'll go into a lot of that type of thing. So those are signals. They have specific learned meanings for us. Sound effects are signals. There's something in them that goes with an exact meaning, and they're used in that way in our society. Music may contain sound effects, but when it does, the resulting meaning goes beyond the original meaning of those sound effects. An example is Leroy Anderson's The Typewriter. Have you guys heard that one before? So basically they're using an old-fashioned typewriter as a percussion section. You have the sounds of the typing, tick, 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 tick. It's kind of like a snare drum. You have the bell ringing, ding. You have the carriage being brought back, tick, tick, ding, ding, tick, ding. And it's almost like this little drum set of the typewriter, the way they use it all the way through the piece, and it's hilarious. Look it up on YouTube if you've never seen it before. But in that case, he's using signals in a musical way and creating humor, but by combining the two. Sometimes it's not for humor, it's for an effect. One of the really famous percussion ensembles that was one of the early percussion ensembles, Ionization, used the sound of a siren. And in post-World War II Western culture, the sound of an air raid siren had very, very emotional ties to it. But then combined with what was going on in the percussion, it had a little bit different effect and different meaning, and still to us today would have something different yet. So let's go ahead and stop there. We'll pick it up there after the break. But let's take your 10 minutes here, stretch, do what you need to do.
Yes.
Go get your coffee and donut, or
It's like, wait, was I driving safe?
Is that light green?
Oh my goodness, I've done that before.
Yeah.
So, we talked about in our what is music, our kind of psychology of music, what is music and how does it have meaning. We talked about music as nonverbal sound. It's one of the kinds of nonverbal sound. And we started talking about how it is artistically organized sound. Looking down at letter C there, whoops. There we go. Thank you. Looking at letter C there. So music, so how is it artistically organized? It uses a balance of artistic elements to organize individual sounds into more meaningful whole. Most times when people come up with a definition of music, they start listing a bunch of elements of music. And that's because those are the ways that we kind of categorize the different sounds that music uses in whatever cultures that we're in. So some of the more universal elements that are present in all art forms include the idea of compare and contrast. So when we're talking about the way music is organized in more of a big term picture, you're comparing sounds, you're contrasting sounds. Unity and variety. If music gets too much unity, it's boring. If it gets too much variety, it's random. Same as with any of the art. So there's always a balance between those two when they're artistically organizing their composition as composers. Repetition and elaboration would be another one. And those are just three examples. And these I'm giving them in twos because they're kind of continuums. A lot of what we'll talk about in musical expression is continuums. It's not one thing or the other. It's how much of one or how much of the other. But those things have to be in a balance. So all art forms use these elements to present meaning as they represent to the human experience. Some of these elements are unique to music. And then I just said to have you guys identify some. I think right now we'll just continue on through for time's sake. But elements such as melody and harmony are unique to music. There's unique uses of rhythm and meter that are different from how we use rhythm and meter in spoken language and poetry. There are specific timbres, as Ellie was getting at, that are unique to music. There's unique uses of expressive elements, things like dynamics, articulations. Those things are used in language, but they're used differently in music too. And there are specific musical forms that are different from the form of literature, the forms in literature, or the forms in other arts or other disciplines. So when we're talking about music this way, we're talking about music as sonic art. It's sound art, if we want to say it that way. Sound is the medium instead of ink, paint, stone, ceramic, wood. Now, is all music art? We can argue about that. But at least when we're talking about the higher level ideas in music, it's working as an art. It's working to stand for something. It's working to represent something. And sometimes it's just kind of fun sounds that people play around with. But again, art or not is kind of a continuum where it falls on that. That's a discussion of aesthetics. But it works like the arts work. It uses sound to represent life, basically. So those are some of the ideas about music being artistically organized. Now let's move on to the main section of our discussion here. Music expresses meaning. And so what is music is kind of an introduction to the second part. How does it have meaning? And this is really the theoretical understanding part that I was talking about earlier. Until you can audiate, discussions about these things are almost totally irrelevant because you can't imagine what we're talking about. We'd have to constantly demonstrate, and even when I demonstrated, you wouldn't be picking up part or a lot of what I was trying to demonstrate. So that's why these type of discussions, you can introduce them a little bit here and there through movement and other ways in elementary, and it's very valuable too. And then gradually kind of build the complexity of it as the students get older, and it's an appropriate time for it. But I would talk about some things, especially when you connect music to movement. That's the easiest way for young kids to connect music with the idea of feeling or sensation, because they naturally will kind of move in some connection with the music. and they'll all move in similar ways to a connection with the music. And those are kind of the universals of the music they're picking up, the sensations, and especially within our culture, the things that at that point in their life they've experienced similarly. So music uses sound to represent universally experienced sensations and thoughts. And you didn't see anything about thoughts in my dad's writing, but that's because that's more of the way that some people interact with music more in a thinking way. What you did see it was in his dissertation when he came up with all the different examples of how people, some of those were very thought-based type processes, whereas others were sensation-based processes. Personally, he's more the sensation-based processes. Dr. Turner and I would definitely be there, but some of the most interesting parts of music to us are the thought side of it, and are the patterns, are the relationships, are the compositional techniques, the analysis, all of those type of things. And that's just a whole different type of mind and personality, and it's not like one's better than the other. We hope that we can help our students develop in all of those areas, no matter what their natural way of interacting is. So musical sensations parallel the basic sensations of life. Everything we can sense with our 5 senses can be represented by musical sound. Think of words like bright, dark, fast, slow, crowded, alone, intense, relaxed, speeding, slowing. And then if we just think in terms of our 5 senses, I wrote up on the board, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. Give me a couple words for each one. What are some sight words? Things that we sense with our eyes. So bright would be one. And usually they come in pairs, bright and dark and everything in between. What would be something else we can sense with our sight?
Fuzzy.
Okay, clear and fuzzy, yeah, exactly. And that might have an analogy to tone quality in music, right? Something else.
Straight.
Yeah, shape, motion, there's a whole lot of things we can understand with sight. Hearing, loud, soft, yeah. Fast and slow, repetition, or some of the things are things repeated. Are they all new? We can sense that. Pitch, high and low, we call it. It's just different frequencies, but we call it high and low. And pretty much any element in music, timbre, we could go into all those things. Smell.
In music?
What are things that we would use to describe what we're sensing through smell? Good or bad? This is a little harder sometimes.
Sweet.
A sweet smell, a savory smell. Yeah, and those are actually taste words, but our smell and our taste is very connected, right? Yeah. There's kind of a pungent odor, something that makes a reaction, like a strong or weak or gentle. We use a lot of words for smell that actually apply to one of the other ones. There's not a lot of unique in our language. Not a lot of unique smell words that don't also apply to something else. But taste, the savory, the salty, the Chick-fil-A, yeah, right. A lot of the salty there, a lot of the savory there. Right? We have sweet and sour. What are some of the other areas of the tongue that they talk about? And then every combination. What's that? Bitter, yeah, that's one. Then every combination of all of those. And touch.
Smooth texture.
Yeah, that'd be a texture. A smooth texture versus a rough texture would be a touch. Kind of a gentle versus a strong, maybe.
Squishy.
Yeah, things that you're sensing through touch. Something that you're sensing could have a squishy or a firm consistency. Sticky, yeah, there you go. So we could actually go down and make lists of dozens of words for each one of these. Now, let's think of it in a different way. Let's think of it as, because we don't just sit here and experience things out there, we also interact with and move through our environment in different ways, and they have their own sense of sensations. These are 4 movement efforts, they call it, that in dance and even other kinesthetic things like sports. They'll focus on these and use these ideas to organize activities and organize teaching your body to move, basically, and to experience things through movement. So space is the idea. You can have like a wide open space or a crowded space. That would be one way of thinking in space. Another would be kind of moving in a direct way or moving in an indirect use of your space. So if I'm using my space to go from here to there, or I'm kind of wandering around in it, that would be another way to think. Weight, is it a strong, a heavy, a light, a free, those type of feels, and everything in between. Time, that's a quick versus a slow motion would have to do with time there, where we get into rhythmic ideas. And then flow, it is something kind of continuous, or is it abrupt and segmented? Those would be some ideas under flow. And actually, in good elementary music curriculums, they'll tie each of these things into movement activities to help students experience these sensations and tie them to music too. So they have to help students develop their physical coordinations to the way to be able to move in these ways. We talked about one of the readinesses for developing a steady beat motion is first to develop a continuous flow motion. If they can't feel the space in between the beats themselves are just these random occurrences. There's nothing connecting them. So we put beat motion onto continuous flow motion, and we have to help them to move in the one way before they're ready to move successfully in the other way. They can approximate it, but they'll be jerky and they'll get off easily and things like that if they're not already imagining the flow type of feeling. So we won't take a lot of time with that, but any of these movement sensations can also be represented through musical sound. Any of the things that we complex combinations of all the senses and the sensations can be represented. It's really pretty amazing when we stop and think about it. But oops, my computer timed out there. I need to put a longer thing onto class here, and also type my password correctly here. There we go. So music expresses meaning. Musical sensations parallel the basic sensations of life. We're constantly bombarded with combinations of sensations that become a large part of our life experience. We don't think about most of them. They're just, it's how we are inside. It's what it is like to be us. It's our experience as we move throughout our day and throughout our life, are all these very complex combinations of sensations. And we also have sensations that originate from inside of us and combine those from outside us. Now, where the thoughts come in, reflecting on these external and internal sensations and their combinations produces thoughts. When we become aware in our mind of what's happening, and that is one kind of thought. If we put verbal words to it, that would be another kind of thought. But we have to kind of experience it and then reflect on it, and experience it and reflect on it, and it's constantly going back and forth as fast as our minds can work. So that's why I say thoughts and feelings. There are a lot of kinds of thoughts that are connected to the sensations, or else the sensations wouldn't be in our consciousness. Some of these sensations and thoughts can be verbalized in language, but many cannot. You ever think about that? Words can tell us so many things, but there's a lot words can't say. It's hard to think of words a lot of times, even when we're college educated, for what's going on inside of us. It's hard to put words. And then when we do, we end up using a lot of words to try to get one sensation across because there's not an exact match. So some of these sensations, like I say, can be verbalized well. They're common enough that people have made words for them, but many can't. Music interacts with us at this basic sensation level and basic level of sensation and reflective thought. So when we talk about universals in music, and people say music is the universal language, and you know why I would disagree with that statement. But there are universals. It is some kind of communication system, and there are universals in it. The universals are this part of it. The sounds emulate the sensations. And so somebody that lived in 17th century Europe or Japan, or 500 years before Christ in Greece, if they heard the same music that we are hearing today, they wouldn't have the same thoughts and feelings, but there would be some things in connection. The fast, the slows, the high, the lows, the repetition of a pattern versus continually moving on. All of those would have some things in common with each other. So that connection to sensation is kind of the universal aspect of music, but it's very imprecise. We think of, it's not communicating a sensation or a feeling, it's more like a group or a world of sensations or feelings that are similar to each other. And depending on your personality, depending on your music aptitude, depending on your musical training, and depending on your culture, those will then start to diverge in different directions. But there's something that kind of starts us in a similar place to each other at least. So music can closely approximate how it is to be us and give definition and expression to those inner thoughts and sensations. And it said here, that's why music people choose and like is so personal to them. Insulting somebody's music is like insulting them. And you can learn a lot from people, specifically our students, by learning about the music they like. So one of the first things I did as a young teacher was I just asked my music students to write down one artist or group or something that they like to listen to. If they chose to listen to something for fun in their own time, what would they like to say? And then I had to preface it with, don't worry, I'm not judging you here, I'm not passing it to the administration, whatever. I just want to know more about you. And if I'm not aware of these people or groups or whatever, I'd like to listen to them and just see what it is that attracts you to them, and that helps me to know you better. And they're pretty honest. I was actually impressed. And I found out a lot about a lot of groups I'd never heard of before, frankly, both in the Christian contemporary and rock worlds and in the secular rock worlds. But you know, once I heard that music, I got those people a lot better. Because there's something that connects them to those sounds. And a lot of times it's not even the lyrics. It's the sounds, the timbres of the voices, the sounds of the instruments being used, just the general feel or sensations of the music. And that kind of described what it was like to be them or what they wanted to be like in some cases, how they wished they were. But it told me a lot about the inner part of them that they couldn't even necessarily verbalize to me. Music can serve as a world of sound in which one can think and feel in musical sound rather than in words or pictures. I think we've mentioned this in this group before, but not everybody thinks in words in their mind. They don't have a dialogue going on. Not everybody thinks in pictures in their mind. They don't have a movie playing in their mind. Some people think in sensation. My wife's one of those, and she has to translate things into the spatial or language worlds, and that's why. You know, it was hard until we got to know each other well to have deep discussions about things that involved what was going on inside her, because she had to translate it into words, and that's not natural for her. That's not how she processes. And it's more of an intuition. It's more of a group of sensations that have very complex connections and are often right on, but take a lot of work for her to turn into words. So I had to learn how to help her through that process, because that is my strength. That's one thing that is a strength for me, is talking about the survey or whatever, understanding what's going on in me, controlling it, and verbalizing it. And that's something that I've always found natural, and it's completely opposite with her, so I can help her in that way, and she can help me in ways that I'm totally clueless at the same time, and that's one of the cool things about being with the person God wants you to be with. You really do complete each other as a whole unit. So, people are born with the potential for thinking and feeling in musical sound, with the exception of certain types of physical or mental disabilities. You know, if somebody's always been deaf, they can't really have a concept of pitch or something, but they can rhythm. You know, we could go to exceptions there, but most people, even those with disabilities, can interrelate with music in some way, and it's helpful and enjoyable for them to do that. One of the best percussion performers is a deaf lady, Evelyn Glennie. I don't know if you've ever heard her play before, but she went gradually deaf. She's totally deaf now, but she actually was a musician before she was deaf. So, and her husband helps her with things like balance and blend and things that she couldn't know. And then she does a lot through the tactile, and she never wears shoes. She can sense the vibrations in the floor and figure out things from that too. So she kind of has her own way of going about things that it's hard to explain to people who are not deaf. But a great performer. And percussion doesn't, except for timpani, doesn't need tuning. So, you know, that would be the area that would be almost impossible for her, were she to be a vocalist or a violinist or something like that. But for playing marimba, drums, multiple percussion, And timpani, you can set your tuning gauges on certain timpani and have somebody else tell you where things are, and then she can even play those fine. But that's harder. She has to use a tuner or something for that, or somebody else. But anyway, with the right musical experience and education, people can learn to use music as an art, to experience those unique kinds of sound, thoughts, and sensations. What we're talking about now is the aesthetic expression through music. We're describing musical aesthetics right now. When you know something musically, you know it even more varied, in a more varied and complete holistic way than you could otherwise. So we can know other people, other cultures, other times through the music of those people, cultures, and times. We can even know God in a unique way through music. And I think that's one of the reasons he includes that in worship. Part of our experiencing interaction with him is musical interaction, since he is and we are musical beings. So it says here, discuss feelings and emotions. You already read an article on that. We'll skip through that. And then why music is not a language of emotion. We've already talked about that too. So let's move on. So musical sensations and thoughts interact with personal characteristics and life experiences of individuals to produce personal musical meaning. So we've talked about the universals. Those are kind of the aesthetic side of it. Now, there's also a completely different side of it, a completely different set of personal meanings that we get out of music that are not the same from people to people, that are not the same even within a culture. Meanings are more similar within a culture than they are across time and culture. Music is even more similar when you have similar experiences and personalities, but everybody is unique at some point. And it's everything, the musical meanings they get are going to be a little different, at least, than another person, even if they have grew up in the same family and had private lessons the same way and did all of those things. Individuals are unique, and the exact musical meanings that they'll have from interacting with a particular music are unique as well. Music can promote or enhance certain emotions, moods, atmospheres, and attitudes. Some people use music as a mood setter or changer. I'm like that a lot of times. Others use music as a mood enhancer. They choose music that kind of represents what's going on inside of them, and it helps them put order and understanding to what's going on inside of them. What about you? Do either of you, or do any of you notice either of those ways that you tend to choose music when it's just you and you have a chance to interact with music? What do you think?
When I'm driving on long trips and going out to my brother's, I have a playlist for the daytime and a playlist for night.
Yeah.
And the nighttime is a lot more like big band.
Okay, yeah.
Because it keeps
Keep
me,
you
like,
awake, right?
Awake, but if it's like during the day and I'm on a highway, I do like more like thoughtful music.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just a time to relax and think. Yeah. Ellie?
If I need to really get something done, like write a paper or something, I listen to a playlist of Beethoven symphonies.
Oh.
For whatever reason, it just.
Too much variety for me. I have to have something that's kind of even keeled while I study.
No,
But
I'm not. No,
some
not
people do
studying.
vocal music.
Yeah, not necessarily studying, but when I'm doing like writing. Like,
Oh, okay.
I have to get like a lot of time.
Okay.
Project to get done or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just it's very
Interesting.
keeps me going.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's just like
Yeah, cool. So, and I never even knew about the second way until my professor at Michigan State brought it up, because I'm so much the first way. I listen to music that's like how I want to be, not how I am to somehow work through it or whatever. You know, again, I have more of an understanding and a connection to that side of myself, so I don't need it in that way, so to speak. But I have noticed, especially when I went through some extreme health difficulties that affected my mind and emotions a lot, I was much more that way. So there's just kind of an interesting thing, and music kind of helped me get through those hard times in that way. So now I have a better understanding than I did when I first read some of these ideas. Either way, music suggests certain sensations and thoughts that must be accepted and internalized for the effect to take place. Just having music out there doesn't make you do anything. And this may be a test question. If you see the word music and makes you in a test question, you know it's false, because music can't make you do anything. It's when you accept it and internalize it that affects you. Now, does it have some effect just being in the environment? Probably. But if you're consciously resisting it, just like consciously thinking and making choices about anything, it's not some magical thing that can make you, like a spell, do something that you're not wanting to do. So you'll hear this, well, so-and-so got away from the Lord and they started listening to this bad music and that made them rebellious and made them this. No, it didn't make them anything. They were rebellious and they chose music. Now what it does is that once you accept it in, it greatly enhances it and it greatly extends it and it helps you go way faster in that direction, and that does happen. But I, as an example, personally worked paint crew through college. A lot of job sites we were at had the local heavy metal station blaring from everybody's speakers, and so I chose to not internalize it. I chose to analyze it from a music theory standpoint, or try to figure out what it was about that music that these guys were reacting to, and what it was about them. I went analytical at it, and it didn't make me anything to do with those sounds, But I wouldn't necessarily choose that. If it were my own time, obviously, but you have to kind of accept it and internalize it for the effect to take place. Music can elicit analytical thought as people compare it to itself, to other music, or to their expectations of what will happen. What do people have to be doing to have expectations?
Thinking.
Audiating. Yeah, without audiation, there's no expectation because it's just one continuous random sound after another. Now there may be other kinds of expectations, like they expect them to get louder here and they don't, or those type of things. But as far as a lot of the pitch and rhythms and harmonic side of music, that takes the audiation in those areas. So composers, music critics, music professors tend to enjoy thinking this way about music. Guilty. Music theory classes teach a high level of this kind of musical thought, so that this analytical thought is one way of interacting with music and is some of the main thoughts that you guys have learned over the last 3-4 years, and maybe before if you had some of those types of training in lessons and in high school. Most other people have these kind of thoughts in the background of their mind, but they don't tend to consciously dwell on them, so they notice same and different. They don't identify sonata, allegro form, But they have their own way of understanding patterns and understanding what's normal in this type of music and that they're acculturated to, and kind of the composers will use that within a culture to create certain emotional reactions to what's happening, and especially in movie music, to go along with what's happening on the screen. Because combined with what's happening on the screen, they have a pretty good sense of what's going on inside the person, and they can use those musical sensations to create certain thoughts and certain emotions, certain reactions on that. But the further you get away from a similar culture, the less that works. Without this kind of musical thinking taking place, music sounds random and has little meaning. So this is a point for music educators. I say acculturation, not exposure. Leading to audiation is key for much musical meaning. Again, I have a personal vendetta against the idea of exposing people to music. I want to acculturate them in music, give them understanding and appreciation, and be educated enough so that they can have expectations and they can know what's going on under the surface there. Yes?
The distinction between acculturation and exposure.
Exposure just means you have it on around.
So the intentionality.
Yeah, and it's not just that you're listening to it for a purpose and headed somewhere with it. That's how I use those terms anyway. Most people, when they say exposing, that's what they mean. But I think acculturation is a better word.
Okay.
Again, same thing with, everybody says music is a language of emotions, and we all know what people mean when they say that. Skillful composers use the musical knowledge and expectations of their audience to suggest certain thoughts, sensations, and even emotional responses. And we just talked about film scores. So what is the role of music in a film score? Why is it there? You ever thought about that? Do you need music to have a film?
It'd be boring without it.
Are there sections of films that don't have music? Yeah, it's interesting to notice that when they bring it in and when they have it not in, and what they're trying to do because of that. So how do composers in our modern culture tend to use music in film score?
Could you go up just a little bit?
Mhm.
While we're talking?
Is that enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Why is the music there?
It sets the atmosphere for the scene and
The atmosphere, the mood, which are another way to say it gives us a common sensation feeling inside it as the others and as what the scene is trying to portray. In that case, it's tied to a very specific thing, the scene, and it wants us to get a certain reaction from the scene. So it's working in a way kind of like music combined with lyrics, where they're trying to work together for a very specific meaning. And in those ways, music is working more like a signal than like a sign. When it's tied to something else like that, even in opera, same thing. They'll use music in predictable ways to get certain things across that tie in with the story. But by itself, pure instrumental music, very much different. Yes?
So a signal in that setting would be like the leitmotifs, or where like every time
Exactly.
a person comes in, that's their little.
And that's one whole way of thinking about composing that's transferred over into our modern society, and that composers use a lot. They'll have certain sounds for certain even cultures. The gangster comes on, you hear rap in the background. Yeah, I mean, whatever. They'll have things that are part of our culture that they'll choose musics. The big fight scene may have some kind of heavy rock sounds in the back, or whatever would be a similar types of feelings and sensations to that particular scene that's going on. So it is working as both a sign and a symbol in some of those cases when it's combined with things. All right, so music also can trigger memories of people, places, things, events, ideas. I call these extra musical associations. It's not anything in the music specifically that's saying that. It's something in your experience that ties the two together, almost more like language words. So this type of meaning depends on your individual life experience and is usually different for each person. The powerful meanings of patriotic or romantic music are examples that illustrate this category. So what do you think and feel when you hear the Star Spangled Banner? Would someone from Iran have that same feeling? It's instrumental music. We've tied certain things to certain songs, and even to certain sounds that are part of certain songs that are just very cultural or even very personal music. People who hear their song as a couple on the radio have a lot stronger tie to it and have a lot different sensations going through them when they hear it than somebody that just heard the song for the first time necessarily. It'd be that kind of thing. The personal meanings people receive from music are most alike when the people involved are similar in culture, musical experience, life experience, personality, purpose. Those are some of the things that make us have similar responses. Then musical meaning can also be affected in predictable ways by the appropriateness of the music for its audience, environment, and purpose. So just to kind of recap, under the musical meaning, we have the universal thoughts and sensations, we have kind of the more cultural and personal thoughts and sensations, and then we have all of these being affected by how appropriate it is for what we're trying to do. And that really affects music in some strong ways, as we'll see here in a second, if you don't already have a bunch of things popping into your mind. Music that is appropriate for the people involved tends to express meaning more clearly, deeply, and uniformly to them. So imagine an instrumental version of a favorite love song. Would others your age experience similar thoughts and feelings? How about a young child? You have personal things tied to individual sounds and individual pieces and individual experiences in your life that are going to be unique to you. Music that is appropriate for its environment tends to be more effectively. I'm having trouble reading today. Music that's appropriate for its environment tends to more effectively enhance that environment and to be more positively accepted. So an example would be a phone going off at a funeral with a fun oldie. You hear that wonderful bouncy music, everybody wants to get up and move, but it's at a funeral, which is inappropriate, so all of a sudden instead of yay, it's scorn, And that has nothing to do with the music, it has to do with appropriateness. But it makes an opposite sensation in us because of the inappropriateness for the setting there. Music that's appropriate for its purpose has a better chance of achieving those purposes, and most fully expressing its meanings. So we think of pep band music in Sunday morning church, or Sunday morning church music at a basketball game. Nothing wrong with either one of them. If we're using them for the wrong purpose, it totally changes the meanings that we're getting from it, right? If we're using it, unless we're purposefully doing it to get a reaction, and sometimes things are used that way too. But then we're trying to get an opposite reaction to the normal thing. That's kind of like sarcasm in speech. Music can be used to help people understand themselves, their universe. Okay, so what are some of the purposes now? Music can be used to help people understand themselves, their universe, and their God in unique and more complete ways. So, for instance, if we thought about our understanding of joy and how joyful music could help inform that understanding. Or maybe music that to us is joyful could help somebody else understand what's going on inside of us with joy. I never even realized there was a difference until I started, I was in college here, and we had one of these groups come in at a time like this, and the youth pastor and a couple of his kids were sitting in, or were staying in our room, and I was talking to him about joyful music, and he was describing something very different from what I thought of in a Christian setting. You know, their church music was very different from ours, and it just occurred to me, he feels something different inside when he says the word joy than I do. And a lot of that has to do with the music that we've been brought up on. So that was just kind of a whoa moment in my mind. And it wasn't opposite, it was similar, but it was very different from each other. Music can be used to unite the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of an individual or group. We talked about music as the great unifier as being a reason for its value. And this may be why God includes music in worship. Think about what else can get all of us thinking and feeling in a similar way, as not only within ourselves, our mind, body, soul, spirit, every aspect of ourselves, but as a group of individuals, all aimed in one direction. You know, music can do that like nothing else can do. And maybe that's why God has it as such an important part of the church and worship experience. Music can be used to experience and express thoughts and sensations that otherwise could not be experienced or expressed as effectively. So my point here, a skilled music teacher can help students experience valuable thoughts and feelings that are foreign to them. This is something that I understood more as I developed as a music teacher and got a better grasp on some of these ideas. I can help change people's experience without having them experience those things by having them experience them musically. It broaden themselves as a person. So in other words, help the introverted to find freedom and release through music. Help the timid to find confidence and strength. Help those with a scattered mind, and there were a lot of them, especially little boys, find some focus. Those with frenetic minds find peace. Those with a forceful personality understand gentleness for the first time. Those that are self-absorbed experience group unity through music. Those that are skeptics even find faith when we talk about combining music with Christian lyrics. And just that process of being involved with that music is something that helps lead them in those directions. The discouraged and disheartened find vitality and purpose, and we could go on and on. But that was one of the things that was really cool to me as a music teacher, as I helped my students to audiate, to experience, perform, listen to, analyze, whatever way I helped them develop as musicians. I could also help increase their personal understanding and experience in positive directions through music. Music can be used to enhance poetry, drama, movies, or other artistic works. This is one of its very valuable purposes, and it helps people experience those ideas more accurately and completely when they're combined in a artistically skillful way, shall we say. Now there's a lot of haphazard stuff that's thrown together and can either obscure the meaning of what's going on or even make it opposite, like we demonstrated earlier with the I love you sentence. But when it's done skillfully, it can really broaden and complete the experience. And that's one of the differences between music and highly artistic music, the amount of that process that can be happening. Music can be used as an effective teaching and learning tool by uniting the whole purpose in the teaching learning process. So the statement here, we remember some of what we hear, more of what we see and hear, even more of what we do, but we remember the most of what we feel, especially deeply feel. And music connects with us that feeling and sensation level. So that's one of the reasons we all learn the ABC songs, you know, and some teachers will use that to help learn other facts in other ways, but it also, our hymnology is doctrine and understanding of God and understanding of relating with people in a spiritual way, and a lot of those things are ingrained in us from the time we're little through music, and music can be very valuable for that. Music can be used to refresh, uplift, and inspire all parts of our being. So those are some of the valuable purposes of music. And I just wanted to conclude here as actually we have a little more time, so I think I can get to some of this, but let me first just read you some of the ending of that paper that I read you the beginning of earlier. Kind of tie things together. So, as we think of music, it can be used to express and experience thoughts and feelings that individuals otherwise may not be able to express or experience. And we talked about that. When music is artistically combined with specific ideas, like in programmatic music, films, musical, vocal music, it helps people think and feel those ideas more accurately and more completely. Even in so-called absolute music, you guys know what I mean by absolute music? Is that a term they use here now? So absolute music versus programmatic music. Programmatic music has a title, a theme, a story, something, a movie, an opera that goes along with it. Absolute music is the things that tend to have form in their name. It's just written for its own sake. Sonata, allegro, in D minor, things like that. There's no intended connection to the composer. It just kind of exists for its own purposes. So even in so-called absolute music that has no extra musical idea associated with it, people can experience thoughts and feelings representing realities they've not yet experienced and may never experience outside of music. A skilled music teacher can help their students experience power, beauty, order, exuberance, calm, innumerable other aspects of life through musical sound. I've seen, and then I just kind of go on and list what I went for you before. I've seen specific examples of some of these things happening. Music is one of the most powerful agents for positive change. It can be used as an effective teaching and learning tool. It helps to create the proper atmosphere for a variety of life experiences, ranging from parties and celebrations to times of mourning and thoughtful contemplation. Many of the positive experiences of a culture are accompanied by music or include music making. So to fully experience those, we need to have the musical development in our culture pretty much happens through school. We don't have a lot of music making happening outside of school anymore, except for church. So in a lot of cultures throughout history, people made music together as part of their culture, and you would learn it growing up. Not today in Western society. School is one of the only places we can get everybody to experience music development. Music helps to define and shape individuals as they grow and take their place in the culture. Music is one of our most effective tools for refreshing, uplifting, and inspiring all parts of our being. The Bible describes how the spirit of King Saul was quieted and renewed by music as David played the harp. David often refocused his thoughts and feelings on God through music. That was after he was rejecting God and having all sorts of issues. The book of Psalms is full of song lyrics describing David's personal journeys back to confidence and faith in God when he experienced doubt and confusion. I use music in a similar manner to direct my personal thoughts and feelings in right directions. We use music each morning, and this was when I was teaching at our previous Christian school. We use music each morning in our school to help our students and teachers begin their day with a joyful spirit that's focused on God. We use music every service in church to help people experience and interact with God in a manner consistent with the truth of His Word. That's one of the most important charges we have as musicians, is to have the training, have the artistry, have the understanding of what's happening in the music, to choose the music that will represent God as He's presented in our Word and help us understand Him in that way instead of in our own cultural, personal way. In summary, music is sound, but not just any sounds. Music is not a language and does not communicate one identical message to every listener, but it is an expressive system capable of imparting important and unique kinds of meaning. All musical meaning is not universal, but some is. Within groups of people with similar background and experience, music can impart meaning in predictable ways. Though all musical meaning is not the same to all participants, a performer or composer who knows their audience can create predictable thoughts and feelings in individuals through musical sound. Fundamentally, music is complex energy waves caused by vibration patterns transmitted through a physical medium to our ears. As such, it is neither morally right or wrong. However, as soon as musical sounds reach our ears, they are interpreted by our brains as thoughts and feelings which are morally right or wrong. The Bible is full of instructions for how God wants us to think and feel. Our music is only morally right if it enables us to think and feel the way God wants us to think and feel. Unfortunately, most people only choose music that they initially like or that makes them feel good. This immature, hedonistic approach to life is all too common among people in general, and Christians in our society, unfortunately, as well. Our music, like our life choices, should be made according to God's truth, with His help, and for His glory. Only then can we experience His best for our lives. So in that last couple paragraphs, I kind of turned it into this direction we're talking about now, discussing how to identify the best music. and we think of the idea of improving what is excellent in Philippians, right? So that would include everything in our lives, including music. The three ideas I try to emphasize with my students, and I think are a good starting place, the redesigned presentation of these ideas from the university, by the way, says these exact same things. It adds one thing to it. It like splits the appropriate thing into two categories. But I was just amazed when it came out. I mean, they'd ask for input and stuff, but it's just kind of cool how God's directed me through the years coming up with these ideas, and then I get to a place that I haven't had any influence on at this point, and God's been leading them in similar directions. So that was really exciting to me to see that, because that was not only like Dr. Moore and people from the music department, that was people from the School of Religion, the seminary, the president has to okay it, you know. So that just was a big confirmation to me when I read what they came out with this summer, that I'm at the place that I should be right now, which is really cool. So we want to think of music as choose music that's morally right. And what do I mean by that? Music that helps us think and feel what God wants us to think and feel. We can start with Philippians 4:8, Galatians 5:22 are good verses in our personal mind as test verses. Finally, brethren, whatsoever is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, if there's excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And then as far as the sensation or feeling side, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such there is no law. Is our music helping us develop in those directions as the Holy Spirit tries to direct us in those directions? I put in artistically excellent too. This is an immoral thing as well. This is my music educator side talking, displaying how music that we choose music. We can choose music of any level of artistry. We might as well choose music that's the higher level of artistry. And again, that's the Philippians 1, 9, and 10. It's my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent, and so be pure and blameless for the day of Christ. And then situationally appropriate. This is where most of the conflict takes place. This is where most of the hard decisions have to take place. And this is where your personal choices, even if they're right between you and God, will differ from the choices that you need to make for a group of people. Because you have to take a lot more things into consideration when you're choosing music for a group. So is it appropriate for the people, the place, and the purpose involved? Those are kind of the three main things to think about. And then the whole concept of Romans 14, where Paul's using the illustration of eating food or not, and taking certain days as holidays and celebrating certain things or not. And he's not saying one thing is always right and wrong for everybody. Be convinced in your own mind between you and God, but realize that when we're together, we need to act differently. We need to act in a way that's going to help each other in positive directions. So that's where, when you someday are choosing music for groups of students, or maybe even for your church, that these are very important ideas to go over at that point. Yes?
This may be a question for another day,
Mhm.
but how much would you say, because you gave 3 important elements of
Mhm.
best music, how much would you say associating the composer, the artist, and their lifestyle, their associations, how much would you let that factor into your music choice?
Only to the extent that everybody in your group is affected by that.
Right, yeah, but
In most cases, performing something by Tchaikovsky doesn't make people think of homosexuality.
No.
There's no connection there in people's minds, so it's totally irrelevant. Now, with a current person that's purposefully doing things that are different from how you're trying to get people to think and feel and act, it may be a lot more of an issue. Yeah. But that's not as much a musical decision, that's a cultural decision. So one thing we have to realize, there is no American culture. Okay? There are tons of subcultures within America, and that's always been the distinction. We are the melting pot. There's no one church culture in America. You know, you'll have students who've grown up connecting very strongly certain sounds of music to spiritual things, and it may have the exact opposite effect on you. But to help. The way I went about this in my school, since I was on more of the conservative end compared to a lot of my students, was I didn't sit there dissing what they did and what their churches did. I didn't feel like, I wasn't the pastor of their church, that wasn't my job. What I did was try to help them expand and experience something beyond what they had to that point. And to, in the meantime, develop their musicianship to the high enough level they could tell the difference. So that's kind of how. Yeah, I'd love to talk, if any of you have individual comments, questions about any of these things, I'd love to just sit down and talk for however long you want, but our time here in class is over, so have a great day.
But